Pharmacological Influences on the Neolithic Transition. By Greg Wadley and Brian Hayden, October 2015. Abstract. While uncertainty remains as to the relative importance of the factors that propelled Neolithization at different sites, a model is gaining traction that proposes that cereal cultivation was adopted in part to produce alcohol for competitive feasting. The model ties together the emergence of two key phenomena, cereal cultivation and social inequality, and is supported by a variety of archaeological and ethnographic data. However, pharmacological theory has not yet been explicitly deployed in the presentation of the model, rather its development has relied on a common-sense understanding of the effects of alcohol and its cross-cultural importance in social life. Our aim in this paper is to bring understandings of drug use from pharmacology and related disciplines to bear upon the challenge of explaining Neolithization. We find that pharmacological theory sheds light on the importance of alcohol and other mood-altering products of Neolithic farming. In particular, there is support for some influence of pharmacoactivity on Neolithic social evolution, which might extend beyond a role in feasting to include modulation of responses to status hierarchies, increased residential densities, and more intense work schedules. We propose that pharmacological influences be incorporated into models of the Neolithic transition. Introduction. The change from a long-standing hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one based on farming and sedentary life in large, hierarchical societies began at a handful of primary sites and spread via movements of people, species, and ideas until it transformed much of the human world. While new data continue to shed light on how and when Neolithization occurred, uncertainty remains about why people chose to undergo this major change in subsistence and social behaviors. Evidence that early cereal farming did not necessarily lead to improved nutrition and population health led many researchers to reject the pull factor of a highly desirable and welcome invention providing security and leisure time for prehistoric peoples, in favor of demand-need or push-based motives such as climate deterioration or population pressure. A hypothesis that is attracting increasing interest proposes that Epipaleolithic populations exploited and then cultivated cereals, not primarily for food but to brew alcohol for use in competitive feasting. An early partial version of this hypothesis was proposed by J.D. Sauer and later elaborated by Katz and Voigt. Recently, Hayden and colleagues provided archaeological evidence for this hypothesis, as one component of Hayden's competitive feasting model. In this view, aggrandizing individuals used alcohol to attract people to feasts and then to manipulate them to acquire political power via reciprocal feasting debts. This alcohol model, when combined with feasting models, explicitly addresses the co-occurrence of two key Neolithic phenomena, cereal agriculture and social inequality, and is supported by a range of archaeological and ethnographic data. However, pharmacological theory has not yet been explicitly deployed as part of the model. Rather, it has relied upon a common-sense understanding of the effects of alcohol and its role in social life. The purpose of this paper is to use insights from pharmacology and related disciplines to explore, in more depth, the role of alcohol and other pharmacologically active comestibles in Neolithization such as coca, poppy, and tobacco. In our view, such crops probably constituted one of the important components of early aggrandizer toolkits for creating differential power. Recognizing a pharmacological role in Neolithization helps to explain the choice of these species for cultivation and contributes to a more nuanced understanding of the dynamics of Neolithization. The Neolithic transition. The earliest known Neolithic transition and one of the best studied occurred in the pre-pottery Neolithic, PPN, in the southern Levant. Climate change during the Epipaleolithic may have led to the appearance of large local stands of wild cereals, possibly cultivated by late Epipaleolithic bands circa 14,500 to 11,700 before present, BP, and PPNA communities of 11,700 to 10,500 BP without creating genetic changes. During the subsequent PPNB era circa 10,500 to 7,800 BP, this area saw the morphologically manifested domestication of cereals, sheep, and goats, the concentration of populations into permanent villages that grew dramatically in size, and a reorganization of political and economic structures and processes. While particular circumstances and species varied, broadly similar processes occurred at many sites globally. Neolithization involved not only new subsistence practices, but also a change in the size and structure of human groups. While simple mobile band societies probably consisted of 15 to 40 individuals living in egalitarian relationships in which food and materials were generally shared, By 12,000 BP some Natufian hunter-gatherer communities had become sedentary or semi-sedentary and were comprised of up to 200 to 300 people who recognized private property, held wealth, and exhibited socio-economic differences. Subsequent PPNA villages such as Jericho had up to 200 inhabitants or more living close together. Some settlements in the PPNB reached town proportions covering areas up to 10 hectares with populations at least in the hundreds and probably much higher. However, there were a number of negative effects that accompanied reliance on domesticated plants. Populations increased in spite of the likely detrimental effects of new diets. Greater densities must have created scalar stresses and fomented greater competition between and within sites, evidenced by an increase in violence in the PPNB. Hayden and colleagues emphasized the risks involved in the long delay between agricultural effort and payoff, such as drought, pests, and theft. Cultivation is a delayed return investment, whose potential nutritional payoff should be discounted because unforeseen events might reduce its future availability. Future discounting is a rational and probably universal practice, and it has been suggested that a key difference between forager and farmer lifeways concerns the degree to which each accepts, and is willing to discount, delayed returns. The most common explanations for the social changes emerging from domestication involve chains of causality in which environmental and population pressures led to crises that forced people to adopt cultivation and participate in complex societies, which then enabled specialization and technological advances, empowering these groups to dominate others. However, the high risks, lower returns, and nutritional disadvantages of cultivation do not seem to support exclusively subsistence-oriented explanations of domestication. Moreover, a link between population pressure and domestication or cultivation is far from certain. The assertion that sedentism produces complex societies is also problematic, since some hunter-gatherers became sedentary without developing social complexity, and conversely, there are highly mobile societies, such as pastoral nomads, that have developed chiefdoms and even empires. Thus we suggest that other factors should be considered which may help explain changes in both sustenance strategies and social structures. Hayden, for example, has argued from ethnographic and archaeological evidence that cultivation was motivated by the advantages that competitive feasting provides in building political power and pursuing self-interests. Feasting and political gift economies are common among ethnographically described complex human societies, including complex hunter-gatherer but not those employing a simple foraging lifestyle characterized by sharing and egalitarianism. Partly through the agency of psychoactive substances, feasts in traditional societies are, and presumably were, used as arenas for inculcating ideologies, creating cohesion and social differentiation within a social group, and introducing new foods and technologies. Feasts require the production and storage ahead of time of large quantities of food and drink, and successful organizers can and do obtain political power and reproductive success. The social competition model proposes that a wealth rather than a dearth of resources enabled people to engage in high-risk production activities such as cultivation and domestication. In this scenario, a failure of food production for feasts could not affect basic subsistence, but success would provide important socio-political advantages. Neolithic domesticates are proposed, in part, to have been used as costly status symbols, helping to bring an end to egalitarianism largely via feasting. Since consumption of alcohol is a primary component of Neolithic feasting, one might expect that producing alcohol for feasts could have been a significant motivator of attempts first at harvesting, and eventually, at cultivating cereals. Noting the possible cultural significance of cereals for making alcohol in the Epipaleolithic, Katz and Voigt suggested that any disruption in the supply of these wild foods would have posited a serious problem, which could have been resolved by cultivating cereals. Smalley and Blake made a similar point regarding the domestication of maize in Neolithic America, arguing that, initially, the primary use was to produce alcohol, the importance of which drove the rapid diffusion of this cereal. Hayden and colleagues have recently presented evidence that Levantine and East Asian pre-farming and farming groups were producing alcohol. These authors describe ancient brewing techniques in detail and propose a method for brewing given the available technology and testing it experimentally. In order to flesh out these models in a broader pharmacological context, we first review the production of alcohol and other psychoactive domesticates by Neolithic farmers with a focus on their behavioral effects. We do not discount the nutritional aspects of agriculture, but acknowledge an attempt to explain the high representation of psychoactive plants among early crops. Psychoactive crops. A psychoactive substance influences thought or emotion through biochemical action upon the nervous system. When exogenous, they are commonly referred to as drugs, but as Sherratt has argued, this term carries controversial and variable cultural meanings and a morally neutral term is preferred. In pre-industrial times, drugs were usually ingested as part of a food or drink, so that effects on mood could be confused with nutritional benefits, thus Jankowiak and Bradford used the term drug foods. However, not all drugs are consumed by an oral route, and we have followed Sherratt in using the term psychoactive substances, abbreviating it to PA. The use of PA precedes agriculture and was widespread in forager societies. Many PA were exploited for medicinal purposes or were mild stimulants, including tobacco in America and Australia, and khat and betel in Africa and Asia. All these plants were eventually cultivated by some groups. Much forager PA use focused on hallucinogens for ritual purposes, such as to induce shamanic trances and communicate with the spirit world. Most hallucinogens are debilitating in high doses, and their powerful effects deter widespread consumption, restricting use largely to infrequent rituals by a few specialists. With domestication, however, the focus shifted from perception-altering to mood-altering, euphoric, or stimulating PA. Domestication enabled the production of large and reliable quantities of such PA. In the primary Neolithic sites, West and East Asian farmers produced alcohol, while American farmers produced alcohol, coca, tobacco, and cacao. European and Asian farmers added opium and cannabis to the Levantine crop complex. In southern India, farmers produced grains for alcohol. In Africa, coffee and cola were major trade items. Sherratt and other authors have illustrated the global importance of PA to farming societies. Table 1 lists the major Neolithic regions and the PA produced there. Mood-altering PA stimulate brain reward pathways. They are highly prized and sought for effects such as amicability, reduction of stress, and feelings of liberation. They are widely used in many cultures, and they have been major trade goods throughout history and prehistory. Psychoactive substances were not the only products of early cultivators, but they were typically the most highly valued and were given religious and social significance. Even today, the majority of adult humans regularly use PA derived from early domesticates including alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, chocolate, and sugars. Ancient users may not have perceived these as drugs in the modern sense but simply as desirable, good-tasting, good-feeling foods. In early modern times, PA played a facilitating role in global colonization, used first to entice indigenous peoples into labor arrangements, and then to reward individuals for labor and production outputs. The effects of PA upon mood and motivation are critical. Habitual users tend to develop psychological or physiological dependency on them and, in turn, on the trader or merchant who provides them. Alcohol. Ethyl alcohol was probably first produced by West Asian Epipaleolithic cereal foragers as well as by complex hunter-gatherers and early farmers in China 9,000 years ago, in Central America 6,000 years ago, in Incan South America, and in Neolithic India where the purpose of growing wheat and barley in some areas seems to have been to produce alcohol. Alcohol has had an enormous impact on social and religious practices around the world. It played a major role in public and private life in most of the major early civilizations, where it was consumed at religious, political, and social events. Nicotine. Tobacco was gathered and cultivated in America as early as 4,000 years ago and was used for religious and social rituals, as medicine, and for trade and recreation. While tobacco was probably originally used exclusively by shamans, with cultivation it became more democratized. After domestication in the Andes, tobacco spread to Central America and then into North America as a domesticate along with maize at least 2,000 years ago. Caffeine and theobromine. Caffeine is a psychostimulant and antidepressant and is currently the world's most widely used PA. Coffee was first exploited in East Africa at least 1,500 years ago, cola in West Africa at least 500 years ago, and tea in China at least 2,000 years ago. All were socially important and were major drivers of agriculture and trade. A drink of fermented cacao, which contains not only caffeine but the pharmacologically similar theobromine, was in use over 2,000 years ago in Central America and may have been the key trade product that enabled the Olmec to create expansive early complex polities in Mesoamerica. Subsequently, chocolate was used in social and ritual settings by the Mayans and served as a currency and elite drink for the Aztecs. Cocaine. There is evidence for coca use as early as 8,000 years ago in northern Peru, so it was a feature of the rise of agriculture and social complexity in the region. By the time of the Incan civilization, coca was a marker of social status and was accorded religious significance. Cannabis. Cannabis was one of the earliest pa used in India and was part of the early Chinese Neolithic crop complex. It was also one of the few domesticates in early Yomon Japan. Charred seeds found in pots throughout Eastern Europe indicate that cultivation spread there soon after initial domestication. Opiates. The opium poppy is native to Mediterranean Europe and was probably the first plant added to the crop complex imported from the Levant. Poppies, cereals, and pulses formed the plant assemblages of the first farmers in Italy, and opioids have been found in the bones of Neolithic miners as well as at burial sites in Iberia. Sucrose. Humans eat sweet, fatty, energy-dense foods in response to depression, stress, and negative affect. These comfort foods induce a psychologically comfortable and pleasurable state for a person. Sucrose acts as an analgesic, reduces stress, and reduces future discounting, with repeated consumption leading to tolerance and withdrawal effects. Sugarcane appears to have been first used at least 6,000 years ago in New Guinea, and its cultivation and use later spread throughout Asia into Europe, where it was a major driver of European colonization and trade. Dietary peptides. Both the neurotransmitter serotonin and its precursor tryptophan influence mood. Karam and others showed that chickpea, a Levantine founder crop, contains a high level of tryptophan which increased with domestication, suggesting that early farmers selected and were able to discriminate high tryptophan varieties. Karam and others argued that mood effects motivated cultivation and may have become important in early agricultural communities. Opioid peptides called exerphins are produced when cereals and milk are digested, and it has been proposed that this contributed to the attractiveness of some domesticates. Most pharmacological evidence for their effects comes from animal models where exerphins raise pain thresholds, reduce anxiety, and interfere with satiety signaling leading to increased food intake. Their function in humans is less understood, though current research is exploring a role in mental health conditions. Summary. The extensive early production of psychoactive substances has been widely discussed in anthropological and archaeological literature, yet pharmacological research has rarely been drawn upon for clues as to how pa might have influenced ancient users. We believe that a comprehensive archaeological explanation of pa cultivation and domestication should include discussion of the psychosocial roles of these substances, a topic addressed next. Understanding psychoactive substance use. Psychoactive substances shape behavior by influencing mood and motivation, future orientation, and social behavior. While early pharmacological research focused on mechanisms underlying compulsive use of psychoactives, recent work has offered a more nuanced understanding, with researchers arguing that much pa use is not the result of addiction per se, but that it serves instrumental purposes such as coping with stress or fatigue, alleviating psychological distress, and achieving work or social goals. Benefits include feeling part of a social group, enjoyment, creativity, relief of pain and anxiety, relaxation, control of waking and sleep cycles, improved memory and concentration, and, in some cases, maintaining neurotransmitter levels. This section reviews current understandings of why pa are used and how they influence behavior. Motivation and emotion. Pa activate brain pathways that regulate appetitive anticipation and consummatory hedonia, which is satisfaction upon attainment. From a Darwinian perspective, they provide artificial subjective rewards that create a signal in the brain that indicates, falsely, the arrival of a huge fitness benefit. Nevertheless, pa lead the user to attribute importance to settings and events associated with pa, and to crave repeated use. Several avenues of research show that pa influence individuals' perceptions of, and abilities to deal with, social situations. Prosocial behavior is facilitated through reduction of anxiety, enhancement of self-confidence, suppression of fatigue, and disinhibition of communication. Nicotine, alcohol, and other pa counter social stress, while alcohol is used for mood enhancement, cognitive performance, and to reduce symptoms of depression. Empathogens such as MDMA increase sociability and make identification of social threat less accurate. Many feasting foods such as alcohol, kava, betel, nicotine, and fatty meat have the same effect. Enjoyment of social interaction is enhanced by exogenous opioids, and alcohol is used to remedy an inability to interact socially. Psychoactive substances can reduce the subjective stress of living in groups, so that social constraints become bearable and the individual feels independent while remaining within society. People and animals become stressed if they feel crowded. Crowding stress is mediated by serotonin and attenuated by antidepressants, alcohol, opiates, and high-caloric food. Artificial rewards are particularly attractive to those who have fewer opportunities to receive natural rewards that lead to increased fitness, example people with low socioeconomic status. Social defeat precipitates use of PA by animals, including cocaine and alcohol, and heavy use in humans is likely due to similar situations. In addition, comfort foods are used to address effort-reward imbalance that arises when physical or mental effort is not commensurate with pay and social rewards. Delay of gratification and willingness to work. Future discounting, or impulsiveness, refers to an individual's preference to receive immediate return or instant gratification rather than to apportion effort now for future payoff. Future discounting is not irrational but represents recognition of the risk that a delayed payoff may not materialize to the extent desired or even at all. Thus all individuals future discount to varying extents. Future discounting is influenced by PA in a complex fashion. While some users are more impulsive than non-users, impulsiveness may both be a cause and a consequence of PA use. In addition, PA use can increase an individual's ability to delay gratification by offering an immediate false reward substitute for a delayed real fitness reward. PA can reduce impulsiveness by inducing a feeling of power over the delivery of reward. For example, opioid users who are currently sated discount less than do those currently deprived, and individuals who have recently consumed sucrose-laden drinks are more likely to accept delayed rewards. PA have been used throughout history to inhibit work-related stress, to overcome muscle and mental fatigue, to adapt to work environments, and to enhance work performance. Tellingly, Muller and Schumann consider high workloads in industrial societies to be a major driver of contemporary PA use. Summary. Psychoactive substance use does not represent merely a problematic behavior indulged in by a minority, rather it is an important and routine shaper of behavior for the vast majority of post-Neolithic humans. Is this mere coincidence, or is there a causal link between widespread adoption of mood-altering PA and the emergence of Neolithic cultures? PA induce prosocial behavior and conformity to social constraints, and reduce scalar, work, and status-related stress. Thus, PA should promote tolerance of larger, more impersonal social structures and the behaviors required of individuals participating in them. They provide substitute rewards in the present that facilitate commitments to work for uncertain future rewards, and they are used to elicit appropriate emotional responses during work. Over the millennia, socio-political and economic organizers have promoted their use by workers. A pharmacological view of the Neolithic transition. Considering the prominence of crops that could produce PA in early farming assemblages, and the profound influences that PA have upon social and individual behavior, we now explore the potential for pharmacological theory as an explanatory factor in understanding Neolithization. Our exploratory model has two facets: 1, that cultivation was adopted in part to establish more reliable supplies of PA, and 2, that the PA thus obtained helped to facilitate changes in social structures and behaviors that characterize the Neolithic phenomena. A motive for cultivation. The alcohol model of Braidwood, Katz, Voigt, Hayden, and others proposes that a desire for the hedonic effects of this PA and its enabling role in feasting and ritual drove intensive gathering and then cultivation of plants from which alcohol is derived. It is often assumed that cereals were cultivated in order to make bread, although the use of maize in South America is often viewed as having been adopted primarily to produce beer. The same may have been true in the Neolithic Levant, although bread may have also had mood-altering qualities due to its high glycemic index and other characteristics. The alcohol hypothesis is supported by pharmacological theories of artificial reward, and is easily extensible to the cultivation of other psychoactive cultigens such as poppy, coca, coffee, cacao, tobacco, and cannabis. It is very likely that these plants were cultivated primarily for their pharmacological effects. Cultivation made psychoactive substances more available, more regularly and more reliably, to more people. Demand for PA would have increased substantially with the appearance of competitive feasting among complex hunter-gatherers, where PA would have been used to attract and obligate people in ways that promoted the power of successful feasters and their supporters. Space constraints limit our documentation of competitive feasting among complex hunter-gatherers prior to domestication, but the Northwest Coast potlatch provides a well-known example. Detailed documentation is provided in Hayden. Cultivators whose efforts were focused on crops with great PA effects but little nutritional value would have had to rely on foraging and hunting for food, in some cases for very long periods. This is consistent with the archaeological record. However, in the long run, crop complexes that yielded both psychoactive and nutritional products, such as the Levantine, East Asian, and American cereal-based systems, ultimately were able to dominate entire regions. Social structures and behavior. There can be little doubt regarding a correlation between Pa use and increasing social complexity, nor of the importance that early civilizations placed upon the consumption of Pa. The question we address is whether there is a causal relationship between social complexity and Pa use. Politically ambitious individuals may have promoted regular Pa use, and Pa use could have substantially advanced political agendas. An increased ability to manipulate people would be a powerful tool in the hands of an aspiring leader, and ambitious leaders probably competed in the use of such tools, offering more, better quality, and newer varieties of Pa. In particular, because Pa were highly desired by many people, the ability to supply Pa could facilitate the ambitions of individuals by helping to lure people into relationships involving debts, favors, and political power as part of competitive feasting. Increased compliance stemming from Pa use among some of a community, combined with intense competition by a few for leadership positions, could act to engender a hierarchy of political classes. Once political control began to appear in this context, Pa use could amplify social differences by attracting people to obtain Pa, creating acquiescence, and providing solace via Pa use for those holding lower status positions in a society that was becoming increasingly hierarchical. Hayden has argued that the distinctive human adaptation lies not in physiology or intelligence, nor even tool use, but in an emotional adaptation to social living and the use of social skills to access food, security, dominance, mates, and success in competitive interactions. This perspective is also advocated for by Gowlett and others. The use of psychoactive substances to manipulate social relationships is likely to be part of this distinctive adaptation. Ethnographic accounts almost always associate Pa use with social acts, often the bringing together of family, friends, factions, allies, or other support personnel. Conflict is a significant contributor to forager mortality, and it is no surprise that conflict also afflicted agricultural settlements as they reached higher densities, yet within-group conflict and violence among agriculturalists was not so great as to prevent stable sedentary polities from persisting. Pa use would have helped communities to grow and become more stable by increasing people's tolerance of large group conditions. By enhancing pro-social behavior, Pa use would help to bind a larger group together, including inducing commitments to future physical confrontations with other groups. This would help agricultural societies to compete more effectively than foraging groups who lacked the organizational framework and group sizes critical for winning conflicts. Complex labor arrangements. The idea that the provision of Pa facilitates complex labor arrangements is not new. Stoller noted that maize beer was used to pay workers and was a key element in keeping the Incan state functioning. Morris quoted a chief's 1556 testimony that, "The main reason that the people obey their leaders here is through the custom that they have to give the people drink." Aztec leaders too provided alcohol to their subjects and controlled the quantities consumed. Egyptian, Sumerian, and probably most other Near Eastern states paid their workers partly in beer. Jankowiak and Bradford and Courtwright argued that drug foods have likewise been a globally important tool of colonizers, operating to induce natives to engage in labor and then used to increase their work efficiency, intensity, and duration. Contemporary Amazonian elders provide coca to farm workers in a manner comparable to the coffee or cigarette break that characterizes labor in the West. Cameron and Jones described a political function for drugs of solace in terms of maintaining working class compliance. Our model simply locates the origin of this strategy earlier within the Neolithic and at a smaller, more localized scale. Discussion and conclusion. Extensive archaeological evidence shows that a significant portion of the effort of early cultivators globally was probably directed to the production of psychoactive substances, Pa, including the use of cereals, poppies, coca, sugarcane, tobacco, and cannabis. We propose a model involving Pa in two phases of Neolithication. First, people were attracted to Pa, and accorded them prestige because of their rewarding, mood-altering properties. Second, as cultivation enabled Pa use to become widespread and regular, the power of Pa to influence social behavior helped to create and reinforce complex social structures by inducing acceptance of crowded conditions, hierarchical power, and regular, hard work for others. Hayden and others concluded that feasting and brewing very likely provided a key link between increasing complexity and the adoption of cereal cultivation. The pharmacological theory presented here supports and enriches this hypothesis and supplies a mechanism for the link. Importantly, it gives the model broader range, as it can be applied to Pa other than alcohol, and thus to more cases of neolithization. Enhancing models of neolithization with pharmacological theory provides compelling causality for the cultivation of Pa crops, and some crops, like cereals, that are usually assumed to have had only subsistence value. When combined with the emergence of complex hunter-gatherers exhibiting feasting and other strategies for controlling labor, which includes ancestor worship, bride prices, material ritual requirements, pharmacology can provide a more powerful explanatory framework for the emergence of increasing social complexity. Although foreshadowed by developments in complex hunter-gatherers, we propose that a major component of the Neolithic transition was a pharmacological transition consisting of a change in the kinds of psychoactive substances consumed, going from shamanic use of hallucinogens to mood-altering Pa, the quantity and frequency of consumption, the ways they were produced, and the range of people who consumed them. The production of Pa crops represented supplemental work beyond mere subsistence needs, and therefore generally would have been undertaken by those with subsistence surpluses and greater access to labor. For example, the production of beer from grain was predicated on a surplus production of grain beyond subsistence needs that only the relatively wealthy could afford. Thus, it would have predominantly been wealthy and highly motivated individuals who produced, controlled, and used Pa to advance their political strategies, generally via cultivation and the hosting of feasts. Our reasoning is applicable to both fully agricultural and mixed strategy groups, and can help to explain both primary neolithization and its spread from initial sites of cultivation and domestication. It is compatible with the proposed extension of optimal foraging models to include the prestige associated with particular items including special foods. Finally, it can help explain why only crop complexes that produced foods both with Pa and subsistence value resulted in the formation of large-scale polities. Thus pharmacology belongs, we believe, among the factors from which accounts and models of early cultivation are constructed.